The news alert flashed across millions of screens. Supreme Court strikes down Trump tariffs. In an instant, living rooms, offices, and public spaces everywhere were filled with the same message. People stopped mid-conversation, their attention drawn to the glowing headlines, realizing history was unfolding before their eyes. In newsrooms worldwide, chaos erupted as anchors scrambled and producers shouted. Phones rang off the hook, editors barked orders, and breaking news banners rolled across every channel. The urgency was palpable as journalists raced to make sense of the seismic shift. The global economy, shaped for nearly a decade by these tariffs, was suddenly upended. International markets reacted instantly, with investors from Tokyo to London watching as years of economic policy were overturned in a single moment. The world's financial heartbeat skipped, then raced. On Wall Street, traders cheered as the Dow surged hundreds of points within minutes. The trading floor, so often tense, erupted in celebration. For many, it was the first sign of hope after years of uncertainty and volatility. The uncertainty that had gripped markets for years was lifting. Investors, who had weathered storm after storm, finally allowed themselves a moment of relief. Smiles broke out, handshakes were exchanged, and a cautious optimism began to spread. Across America, disbelief and hope spread. Did you see, is it real? In homes, offices, and on city streets, people shared the news with friends and strangers alike. Social media buzzed with questions and speculation as the nation tried to process what this meant for their future. At the Supreme Court, reporters swarmed, eager for a word from the lawyers. Microphones and cameras jostled for position as legal experts and officials emerged to face a barrage of questions. The world wanted answers, and the courthouse became the epicenter of national attention. The decision, years in the making, questioned the very authority of the presidency. Legal scholars debated its implications, wondering how this ruling would reshape the balance of power in Washington. The foundations of government seemed to tremble as the country watched. For everyday Americans, the impact was immediate. Car prices, appliances, groceries, all tied to this ruling. Families wondered if relief at the checkout line was finally coming, while business owners recalculated costs and supply chains overnight. The tariffs had touched every corner of daily life. Now, their reversal promised relief, but also new questions. Would prices fall? Would jobs return? Around dinner tables and in boardrooms, Americans weighed the possibilities and braced for what came next. The nation held its breath, caught between the end of one era and the uncertain dawn of another. In that moment, hope and anxiety mingled, as millions waited to see how this historic decision would shape the days to come. In a landmark decision that sent shockwaves around the world, the Supreme Court's 6-3 ruling declared the Trump-era tariffs unconstitutional, overturning years of contentious trade policy with a single historic judgment. The ruling stripped the executive branch of its broad authority to impose tariffs unilaterally, fundamentally shifting the balance of power over trade policy back to Congress and the courts. Almost instantly, global markets soared. Frankfurt, Paris, Tokyo, and Hong Kong all posted record gains as investors reacted to the sudden removal of trade barriers that had stifled international commerce for years. Investors scrambled to adjust their portfolios to a world suddenly free of unpredictable tariffs, with financial analysts predicting a new era of cross-border investment and economic growth. International leaders cautiously welcomed the decision, expressing hope that it would mark the end of years of escalating trade wars and open the door to renewed cooperation and negotiation. In the US, importers and retailers celebrated the news, anticipating lower costs, a wider variety of goods, and the chance to rebuild global partnerships that had been strained by years of uncertainty. Industry groups hailed the ruling as a major victory for American businesses and consumers alike, predicting that lower prices and increased competition would benefit households and companies across the nation. But not everyone cheered. Labor unions in the steel and aluminum industries warned of renewed foreign competition, fearing that the flood of cheaper imports could threaten the livelihoods of American workers. They voiced deep concerns that American jobs would be at risk as imports surged, and called for new protections to safeguard domestic manufacturing from being undercut. The political divide deepened, with old battle lines redrawn and fierce debates erupting in Congress and across the media about the future of American trade policy. For some, the nightmare of trade wars and rising prices was finally over. For others, the The fight to protect American industry and jobs was just beginning, fueling passionate activism on both sides. The world watched with bated breath as America's trade future was rewritten in real time, with newsrooms and citizens everywhere glued to the unfolding story. The consequences of this Supreme Court decision would ripple across economies and societies for years to come, shaping the global landscape in ways no one could yet predict. Tariffs are taxes placed on imported goods, often quietly added to the price of products we buy every day. Most people don't notice them, but they're there, hidden in the cost of everything from electronics to clothing. These taxes are designed to make foreign products more expensive, giving an edge to domestic industries and encouraging people to buy American-made goods instead. Supporters of tariffs argue that they help save local jobs, protect small businesses, and keep entire industries alive. They believe tariffs are a shield against unfair competition from abroad. But critics see tariffs as a hidden tax on consumers. When companies pay more to import goods, they often pass those costs down to shoppers, raising prices on everything from cars and washing machines to groceries and everyday essentials. Tariffs can also be used as bargaining chips in international negotiations, but in the end, it's American buyers who feel the pinch in their wallets. The debate is fierce and ongoing. Should we protect jobs at home or keep prices low for everyone? It's a question with no easy answer. Tariffs create winners and losers. A steelworker might keep their job thanks to higher import taxes, but a family could end up paying more for appliances, cars, and even their monthly bills. When the Supreme Court stepped in, their decision tipped the scales, ending a complex economic balancing act that had affected millions. For years, tariffs shaped daily life in subtle, often invisible ways, impacting what we pay, what we buy, and even where we work. Now, with tariffs removed, many hope for relief at the checkout counter, while others worried about what the future would bring for their jobs and businesses. The true cost of tariffs had always been hidden in plain sight, buried in receipts and price tags, rarely questioned, but always paid. With the Supreme Court's ruling, Americans would soon discover just how much they'd been paying all along, and what life might look like without this hidden tax. The economic landscape was about to shift dramatically, with ripple effects reaching every corner of the country. As the news spread, the nation braced for what came next, uncertain, but hopeful for a new chapter in the American economy. At the heart of the conflict, who sets tariffs, Congress or the President? The Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate commerce and impose taxes. The President's role is to negotiate, not unilaterally set economic policy. Over time, Congress delegated some authority, notably through the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. Section 232 allowed the President to impose tariffs for national security, but only in emergencies. The Trump administration stretched this, using national security to justify sweeping tariffs. Critics called it an abuse, a loophole to bypass Congress. The legal battle became a test of separation of powers. Could the president act alone, or did Congress retain ultimate authority? The Supreme Court was now the final arbiter. The stakes, the very structure of American democracy. The tariffs began as a core promise of Trump's America First campaign. He blamed bad trade deals and foreign competition for the decline of U.S. manufacturing. Tariffs, he argued, would protect American jobs and force fairer trade. In 2018, the administration imposed steep tariffs on steel and aluminum, citing national security. Allies and rivals alike were hit, disrupting global supply chains. The administration doubled down, targeting China with even broader tariffs. This marked a sharp break from decades of free trade policy. The gamble short-term pain for long-term gain. The result, a deeply divided nation and a global economic shockwave. Supporters saw tariffs as a lifeline for American workers and industries. Factories reopened, production ramped up, and "Made in the USA" made a comeback. For many, tariffs were patriotic, about sovereignty and putting Americans first. Critics, however, saw disaster. Higher costs, disrupted supply chains, and lost export markets. Tariffs, they argued, were a tax on Americans, not foreign countries. Retaliation was swift. Europe and China targeted key U.S. exports like bourbon and soybeans. Farmers lost markets overnight. Manufacturers faced rising costs. The trade war spiraled, hurting the very people tariffs were meant to protect. Instead of saving jobs, critics said, tariffs destroyed them and raised prices for everyone. The nation was split. Hope for revival on one side, fear of economic self-harm on the other. The debate raged in Congress, on factory floors, and at kitchen tables. The stakes were personal, the consequences real. The country waited for resolution. The tariffs sparked immediate legal and political backlash. Congress accused the president of abusing national security powers to bypass their authority. Bipartisan efforts to reclaim control stalled amid deep divisions. Legal scholars warned of a dangerous precedent. Could any president now impose massive taxes at will? Lawsuits flooded the courts, challenging the legality and process behind the tariffs. Lower courts issued conflicting rulings, deepening uncertainty. The central question: did the president overstep the authority granted by Congress? The stakes were no longer just economic, but constitutional. The legal chaos made a Supreme Court showdown inevitable. The nation's balance of power hung in the balance. The Supreme Court hearing was high drama. Lawyers, journalists, and stakeholders packed the room. Justices grilled the government. Where does presidential power end? They questioned the broad definition of national security used to justify tariffs. The government argued for deference to the president. The justices seemed skeptical. The business coalition's lawyer detailed lost jobs, higher prices, and retaliatory tariffs. She argued Congress never intended to give the president a blank check. The issue was checks and balances, not trade policy. The justices probed legal history and the Constitution's intent. By the end, it was clear the court was deeply concerned about unchecked executive power. The nation waited, knowing the ruling would reshape the future. The Supreme Court's ruling was decisive. The president had overstepped, and the tariffs were struck down. Businesses rushed to seek refunds. Congress moved to reclaim its trade authority. Hearings began to modernize trade laws and prevent future overreach. Globally, relief and optimism spread. Trade relationships could stabilize. The World Trade Organization's role was reaffirmed. The ruling didn't erase years of conflict overnight, but it removed the biggest source of uncertainty. The decision was a landmark for checks and balances. It sent a message: no branch is above the Constitution. For consumers, businesses, and the world, a new chapter had begun. The rule of law had prevailed, promising a more stable economic future.